The grand hall of the Ethran royal palace was prepared for the formal ceremony honoring coalition military personnel who'd served with distinction during the recent border conflicts. Human Special Operations Captain David Chen was among those being recognized. His tactical leadership had been instrumental in several key operations. He stood in the preparation chamber adjacent to the hall, donning his dress uniform armor with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd performed this routine countless times. The armor was ceremonial rather than combat functional, but protocol required it for formal military honors. Queen Solara observed from the elevated gallery, not unusual, as she often reviewed preparation procedures to ensure ceremonies proceeded smoothly. She watched various officers and warriors with the careful attention of someone who took protocol seriously. Then David reached to secure his chest plating, and the movement caused his undershirt to shift, briefly exposing his back. Queen Solara went completely still. On David's back, visible for only seconds before the armor covered it, was a tattoo, intricate geometric patterns forming a symbol that Solara recognized instantly with shock that disrupted her carefully maintained composure. The mark of Velthara Kesh, the Eternal Covenant, a symbol from ancient Ethran history, one that supposedly existed only in historical texts and legends about bonds forged before humanity had even developed spaceflight. Solara descended from the gallery with movements that suggested barely controlled urgency. She approached David directly, dismissing the attendants with a gesture that brooked no argument. "Captain Chen, show me your back." David turned, confused by the sudden command from someone he'd only seen from a distance during formal functions. "Your Majesty, is there a problem with my uniform?" "Your back," Solara repeated, her voice carrying authority that made it clear this wasn't optional. "Show me the tattoo you carry." David hesitated, then removed the armor plating he'd just secured and lifted his shirt, revealing the full tattoo, elaborate geometric patterns that formed a symbol roughly 6 inches across, centered between his shoulder blades. Solara stared at the mark with expressions cycling through shock, disbelief, and something that looked like carefully controlled emotion. "Where did you get this mark? Who gave it to you?" David looked over his shoulder at the tattoo that had apparently caused this extreme reaction. "I got it during my first deployment 15 years ago. There was I'm not sure how to describe her. An old woman in a settlement near the border zones. She said she could sense I was going to face terrible danger, and she marked me with this for protection." He paused, remembering. "She said it was an old symbol that would keep me safe when darkness came. I thought she was just a kind local offering traditional blessing. The tattoo has been with me through every deployment since." "The old woman's appearance," Solara demanded. "Describe her." "Elderly, maybe in her 90s, Ethran based on the ears. She had violet eyes that seemed, I don't know how to explain it, ancient. Like she'd seen things beyond normal lifespans." Solara's composure cracked visibly. "Grandmother Thessa, the last keeper of the old ways. She died 12 years ago, but before she passed, she spoke of having fulfilled a final duty, marking the one who would come when the darkness returned." She looked at David with intensity that made him deeply uncomfortable. "Captain Chen, the symbol you carry is the mark of Velthara Kesh, the Eternal Covenant. According to our oldest histories, this mark was created millennia ago during the First Darkness, when our civilization faced extinction from forces we could not defeat alone." Solara gestured to the symbol. "The ancient texts speak of warriors from beyond our world who would be marked by the keepers, bound to our people through sacred covenant that transcended species and time. These warriors would return when the darkness threatened again, drawn by bonds they didn't understand to stand with us in our greatest need." "Your Majesty, I'm just a soldier," David protested. "Your grandmother was kind enough to give me a protective mark. I don't think that makes me part of an ancient prophecy." "The mark of Velthara Kesh cannot be replicated or given falsely," Solara responded. "Only the keepers of the old ways could inscribe it, and they did so only when they recognized someone who carried the resonance of the ancient covenant, someone whose fate was bound to ours through connections that preceded conscious understanding. Solara called for her senior advisors and the keeper of royal archives. When they arrived and saw the mark on David's back, their reactions ranged from disbelief to something approaching religious awe. The archivist, an elderly Ethran male, studied the tattoo carefully before confirming, "This is authentic. The mark of Velthara Kesh, inscribed with proper ritual elements that have been lost to all but the ancient keepers. This human carries the eternal covenant." He looked at Solara with expression carrying weight. "Your Majesty, the prophecies associated with this mark are specific. It appears only when the bloodline faces existential threat, when the darkness that nearly destroyed our people millennia ago returns in new form." "We face no such threat," one of the senior advisors objected. "The recent border conflicts were serious but hardly existential." Yet, the archivist interrupted, "The mark appears before the threat manifests, not after. Captain Chen was marked 15 years ago, meaning Keeper Thessa recognized the resonance that far in advance of whatever crisis is coming." Solara looked at David directly. "The ancient covenant bound warriors to our royal bloodline, not through servitude but through sacred obligation to protect when the darkness returned. You were marked as a young warrior, long before you had any connection to our people, because the Keeper recognized you carried the resonance of one bound to our fate." "But I chose to work with your people," David protested. "I wasn't compelled or drawn by mystical bonds. I signed coalition contracts because the work aligned with my skills." "And yet you are here," Solara responded, "at this moment in our palace, marked with a symbol that says you are bound to protect our bloodline when existential threat emerges. Whether you attribute this to prophecy or remarkable coincidence, the pattern is undeniable." Over the following days, as David tried to process what he'd learned, Solara shared more of the ancient histories associated with the mark of Velthara Kesh. "During the first darkness, our people faced annihilation from forces we couldn't defeat. Beings from beyond our world, warriors whose origins were never fully documented, arrived and stood with us. They were marked by our keepers and bound through the eternal covenant." She looked at David. "Those warriors saved our civilization, but at great cost. Many died in the final battle. The survivors left, but the keepers maintained the covenant, watching for signs that the warriors would return in new forms when the darkness threatened again." "You think I'm a reincarnation?" David asked. "I think you carry a mark that says your fate is bound to ours," Solara corrected. "Whether through reincarnation, genetic memory, or simply being someone whose character resonates with ancient patterns, the mechanism matters less than the result. You are here marked, at a time when our archivists warn that signs point to the darkness's return." David thought about the 15 years since receiving the mark, the way his career had consistently brought him into contact with Ethran forces, the inexplicable instinct he'd always felt about protecting certain objectives, even when it defied tactical logic, the sense that something larger than himself was guiding his path. "If what you're saying is true," David said carefully, "what does this covenant actually require?" "It requires that you stand with us when the darkness comes," Solara said simply. "Not as contracted mercenary or allied soldier, but as sacred protector bound to our bloodline through covenant that transcends normal service. The mark on your back says you will be where you're needed when that moment arrives, not because you're ordered, but because your fate is tied to ours." When the existential threat finally manifested 6 months later, ancient enemy forces emerging from dimensional rifts, targeting the Ethran homeworld with extinction-level weapons, David found himself positioned exactly where the prophecy predicted. He fought with instinct that seemed to transcend his training, protecting Queen Solara and the royal bloodline with precision that suggested the mark on his back was guiding him through connections he didn't fully understand. And when the final battle ended, the darkness driven back through sacrifice and courage that cost thousands of lives, David understood that the old woman who'd marked him 15 years ago had seen something essential about his fate. "You fulfilled the eternal covenant," Solara said after the crisis. "Whether you believe in prophecy or attribute this to remarkable preparation, you stood as sacred protector when my people faced extinction. The mark you carry has proven its truth." She extended her hand. "Captain David Chen, by authority vested in me and by recognition of the ancient covenant you fulfilled, I acknowledge you as Velthara Keshter, eternal guardian bound to our bloodline through marks and deeds that transcend normal service. You are bound to us not by contract, but by fate recognized before you understood what it meant. Some bonds are formed through conscious choice and negotiation, some through shared experience and mutual survival, and some are created through ancient marks given by dying keepers who recognize resonance that transcends understanding, proving that destiny sometimes announces itself through symbols carried on the body, waiting for the moment when fate demands the protection those marks promised across years and species barriers. The soldier who thought his tattoo was simple protection discovered it marked him as sacred guardian bound to a people through covenant established before he was born, and that some callings are recognized not through understanding, but through marks that carry weight across time.